I want to discuss the nature of voting in this election, seat by seat. I mean, from the point of view of so-called tactical voting and um, the idea of safe seats, marginals, etc. We hear this in every election. We hear that to an extent there'll be tactical voting, and this seat is red, this seat is blue. Um, there are a few things to notice. Before I get into that, I watched two interesting videos that are kind of related to the subject. One was about the homelessness problem in Southend-on-Sea. Now, Southend is pretty much like the southern equivalent of Sunderland, where I live, a depressed seaside town that suffers a good degree of poverty and underdevelopment. I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but I've never been to Southend. My parents lived in South Essex for a while, but I can definitely see some similarities between Southend and Sunderland. And the second video was about, and that was showing all the complexities of the homeless problem. I mean, one guy that they spoke to at the start had been a Tory voter and a small business owner, but things went wrong in his life, and he ended up on the streets. So it just shows that it can happen to anyone. The second video was about whether or not Tories may be losing heartland, so-called heartlands, and that featured Guildford. Same reporter, it featured Guildford and Surrey, and the sort of responses that he was hearing were not exactly predictable. So, for example, there were students at the local university saying that they were intending to vote Tory or they were against another referendum. This isn't necessarily the stereotype that you would expect of students. So the media love to do this sort of thing about pigeonholing these monolithic blocks of people. They do it in this country. They definitely do it in the States. Like, oh, the Democrats need to woo, black women or uh, veterans or white men or the LGBT community or whatever. The problem with that sort of thinking is that it just put these people into monolithic blocks. That is not realistic. So whilst you might get certain trends in voting with certain demographics, I think it's very unhelpful. And I think the media should stop doing it. And then politicians and political parties pander to it because they think that they have to. I understand that there is a degree of maybe a trend developing, but I think that's a mistake to over rely on that. Not all millennials think a certain way, which is the point I made in the video I made on that subject. But anyway, on the issue of marginals and safe seats and so on, there is an issue where you get, for example, here in the northeast, Sunderland and Newcastle are both steady Labour seats. Sunderland hasn't had a Conservative MP in literally 60 years. I think the last time was 1959. I'm not 100% sure about that, but it's about 60 years. Julie Elliott, my local MP, has a majority, I believe, of 9,500, which is a pretty comfortable majority. Now, in this election cycle, I've got three pieces of party material from the Labour Party, from her. I've got nothing from any of the other parties. This may be an issue to do with funding, because I think the average voter doesn't realise that parties have funds. And if, for example, you are a Conservative candidate in a Labour seat, in a strong Labour seat, the Central Party office isn't going to put a lot of money into a seat they don't think they can win. So for candidates who are going up against, a sitting MP, an incumbent who is following on from a history of steady of that party always getting elected in that particular seat, it sort of feels like a losing battle, and it must be very soul destroying for candidates to knowingly put themselves through that, because they know deep down they probably won't win. Um, and so the central party office, and this is true of most parties, isn't going to fund the campaign in an area they don't think they will win. They're there just to have a presence, just to give people another vote. Um, I mean, my local Conservative candidate, it says address in Kingston and Surbiton, which is in Greater London. So the guy doesn't even live in Sunderland, which indicates to me they've just kind of given up. They're just not even going to bother because I highly doubt anyone in Sunderland has heard of the guy. Um, but I think it would be wrong to say that. I mean, the idea of safe seats sort of implies that the sitting MP is complacent. I think that may be true in some cases. I have to say, having spoken to Julie Elliott a few times, I quite like her as an MP, and I don't think that she is complacent. I don't think she's just like, oh, just elect me when it's sort of election time, or just, I just care when it's election time. She has done some things I support and I give her credit for. So I will strongly consider giving her my vote this time round. Significantly, she didn't have Jeremy Corbyn on any of the leaflets. That's telling. But you get the same situation in, real blue seats. A Labour candidate knows they have a very limited chance. I mean, they know that the sitting candidate is going to get 15,000 votes. They may get 6,000 votes. And then you get, third parties, the Liberal Democrats, the Brexit Party, the Greens. In most seats, they'll be lucky if they get over 1,000. So, is this good for our democracy? Well, the thing is, it is democratic because nothing is stopping people from voting for the other parties, really. There is a funding issue with what material they or how much they can spend in a particular constituency. Just for the record, I do not support the massive, massive expenditure we see in American elections, the $1 billion elections. However, I do think there should be a realistic and fair amount. I'm not sure what the election commission's rules are at the moment regarding election spending. I think it should be a reasonable amount. I personally don't have a problem with political parties making the broadcasts. I mean, some people would have a situation where there is no propaganda whatsoever, no sort of party political broadcasts or leaflets or anything like that. Well, that's a bit silly. You can't, expect people to vote if they don't know what they're voting on. And not everyone has access to a computer to look at the online manifesto or local candidates. So I do think there should be a reasonable amount allocated to candidates in constituencies, or not allocated but allowed by candidates. I don't think it should be too low. It certainly shouldn't be massive, but I don't think it should be so low that it's, they can't do anything with it. And sometimes I wonder if the Americans go too far with, broadcasts every 5 minutes, maybe, I'm just floating this out there, maybe we don't actually have enough. Maybe people need to know a bit more rather than just having these shouting matches, actually have more policy detail. I personally would have no problem with that. As an undecided voter in this election, I personally wouldn't have a problem with actually. I mean, honestly, do you think the average member of the public really knows the details about Labour's Brexit policy, or the Tories' crime policy, or the Greens' education policy? So allowing political parties to put that out there, I don't have a problem with that, so long as it's not over the top and so long as it's done fairly and equally among the parties. But the thing is, if you have, I mean, I've got 6 names on my ballot. I'm not going to show it. Don't know what the legalities of that are. I know you're not meant to show a used ballot, but I won't do it. I won't risk it. But I have 6 boxes there: Labour, Conservative, Brexit Party, Liberal Democrats, one Independent, one Green. I think that's it. Yeah. Um, and of course, in the Scottish seats, there's the SNP as well. And again, there'll be areas where the SNP just has dominance. Although in Scotland, it's, I think, an SNP Labour battleground. I think 2015, when the Tories had a big resurgency there, was a real shock to Labour. I think Labour may be on the ascendancy in Scotland again. Personally, I'm a unionist. I want to see unionist parties doing well on that issue. Um, but so long as the SNP has a voting mandate, they might unilaterally try and declare another declaration of independence. Unilaterally, even beyond the second referendum. But anyway, I digress a bit there. Um, People in swing seats, places like Birmingham, parts of Leeds, London, where votes do change quite often. I'm only saying Leeds because of the Brexit vote was 50-50, but Birmingham and London are two good examples. They're pretty mixed bag. Um, and so there is more margin for things changing there. I do sometimes wonder. I mean, I spoke to the Conservative candidate in Newcastle City Centre a few nights ago. I wasn't talking so much about domestic issues. Maybe I should have. I've kind of kicked myself a little bit since then. I feel I maybe should have brought up some issues I feel strongly about on welfare and so on, and how claimants are treated, but I didn't. I spoke to her about the China issue. I spoke to her about the union and other issues, but I sort of was wondering, does she know deep down she doesn't really have a chance, looking at the history of how Conservative candidates have done in Newcastle in recent years? But, she was standing there with two volunteers. They took quite a bit of abuse. One irate woman came up and told them they have blood on their hands and they're scum. No uncertain terms. So I give her credit for getting out there, but I sometimes wonder if political parties give enough support to candidates who are going up against that sort of situation. I mean, and I'm talking about all parties. I understand the logic. Why put resources into an area you'll probably lose when the resources go to into an area that you might win? But I think this thing about tactical voting, I understand the logic of it. For example, if you want an end to austerity, if you want an end to the Tories' cruel welfare policies, then it makes more sense to vote Labour than Green, because Labour is far more likely to form a government. But if you're a Green voter and you disagree with Labour in other areas, then vote with your conviction. So I don't know. Personally, I never vote tactically. I vote with what I believe in. But I tend to vote for bigger parties anyway. Um, I would be open minded to giving an independent my vote. I mean, I have to look into the guy that's on my ballot, but I would like to see a few independents actually win this time round. Now, I know the argument against independents, so they don't stand for anything if they're not with a party. I think that's an unfair argument. I think an independent can work with all the parties, those that they agree with, those that they think can actually do good for the country, and they have the advantage of not, being tied down by a party whip or being like having to nail their colours to the mast. They can really vote with their conscience, and they can really work with their conscience and not always have to toe the party line. So in this election, I would like to see some independents actually get seats, just to show that it can be done, and just to show that Labour and the Tories can't have a monopoly on everything. I do think it is healthy that, we don't have this big duality of Labour and Tory all the time. The Lib Dems got burned, of course, when they went into coalition, so they're not going to do that again. But um, I'll close with this, and this is something I may talk about more in another video. I'm not overly happy with the choice we have. I'm not overly enthusiastic about any of the leaders right now. But I would still much rather have a bad choice than no choice at all. The idea of living in a country where there's no elections, where I can't voice my opinion, where I cannot have that choice. I may not like the result. I may not be particularly happy with the choice that there is. I'm not. But the very fact that I have the right to put that cross on a ballot is something that I do value. The report, by the way, about the homelessness in Southend was about getting voting registry to homeless people. So that's very important because it gives them a sense of dignity, and just it should be a reminder that they are citizens like everyone else. So let me know, if you live in the UK. Do you live in a marginal constituency? Do you live in a solid red seat, a solid blue seat? Um, I always despair when I hear people saying that, oh, I've always voted this way or my parents voted that way. Okay, if you believe it, but for God's sake, don't vote because your friends and family vote a certain way. Think for yourselves. I think that's really troubling, actually. that people can be that flippant about it. When people around the world are dying and getting beaten for the right to vote. I mean, we've just seen in Hong Kong, fantastic news. The pro democracy parties seem to have done well. And that may be worth a video in its own right. That sends out a message to Beijing. But, what Hong Kong has went through over the last half year shows how precious the right to vote is. People could say it's a waste of time. People could say nothing ever changes. I disagree. I mean, no one can say that Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson are clones of each other. They're very different politicians. So even if you dislike them both, at least they're there to see. Johnson's a true blue Tory, and Corbyn is a true red socialist. So it's plain to see. Um, I still haven't settled who I'm going for this year. I like Julie Elliott as an MP, but I do have grave concerns about Jeremy Corbyn and his front bench. So I need to think about that. But let me know what you think about this idea of tactical voting, about marginals. Will you do it? Will you vote with your conscience? What do you think? And what what can change in terms of? I think parties should maybe be a bit more supportive of the candidates, especially candidates who have lost. I mean, that's a difficult thing, and we talk a lot about mental health these days. That includes politicians, and it seems sometimes it's like, oh well, they've lost a seat, then to hell with them. I think parties need to look after their candidates before and after an election because it's a tough thing. It is a difficult thing to put yourself out there, to put up with abuse. You know, I saw that. Although I really have contempt for a lot of the things the Tories have done, and I would agree with some of the heckling that was going on. It still shows that you need tough skin.